So, Russian saber rattling has hit some new heights. It is Monday, November 17th, 2025. Here's Andrei Kartopolov. We'll start here. Kartopolov is the head of the Russian State Duma's Defense Committee, saying we have a clear understanding of who our likely adversary is. At present, our likely adversary is NATO, and our actual adversary is Zelensky's gang known as the AFU. So he's coupling these two right together. It's not just that they're at war with the AFU, but our likely adversary is all of NATO. But then they'll deny it and say, well, NATO, they're the ones that are the warmongers because after all, they're increasing their defense budget from 2% to 5%, not saying anything about that they're at 7% themselves. Okay, so that's just one example. Here's another example. We took Berlin in three times already. If necessary, we'll take it a fourth time, says Gennady Zyuganov, the first secretary of Russia's Communist Party. Look, I'm not making it up. Let's watch it. There will be people like Pistorius. What will happen? And he's asking this, we will win, Gennady. Will we win? Don't take it seriously. We took Berlin 3 times. If necessary, we'll take it a fourth time. Everything will be okay. I'm a peaceful person. I am for peace. You're for peace, but you're saber rattling like that, and it's constant with them. It's just gaslighting. I mean, that's what it is. Here, some more gaslighting. Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zakharova thinks that Europe has economic problems because it imposed sanctions on Russia. That's the cause of Europe's economic problems, forced by the United States, no less. Note Zakharova carefully avoids mentioning Russian economic problems in her statement. She says this, let's break it down. The economic problems in Western European countries because they have imposed sanctions on Russia starting in 2014, and their markets suffered enormous damage due to our countermeasures. But after all, they were the ones who imposed the sanctions, and not on their own, but under pressure from the United States, because the United States is always the big boogeyman, and Western Europe is just slavishly doing its will. It has nothing to do with the bad mistakes that Russia's made over this time by invading Ukraine and spending all this money and men on Ukraine. Romanian authorities have ordered the evacuation of residents in the village of Paru on the Danube River that forms the border with Ukraine after a drone reportedly struck a liquefied natural gas ship carrying liquefied natural gas on the other side of the river. It was a Turkish ship. So let's understand the facts set here. So Russia not only hit Ukraine, but then hit a Turkish ship carried liquefied natural gas, which is like a big bomb because it's on fire. Because like if that blows up, that's bad. And Romania is actually evacuating people on their side of the border as a consequence. And we're just talking about threats from Pistorius that we'll just invade Berlin. And then Poland, the Polish prime minister, has confirmed that an act of sabotage took place involving the blowing up of a railway line roughly 70 kilometers south of Warsaw. This is one used by the Poles in Ukraine to get material into Ukraine, as I understand. And there were actually 3 different incidents here. So, but, Russia's not doing anything. It's those bad people over in NATO. Poland's chief of the general staff says that the country is effectively in a pre-war phase. According to him, Russia is already laying the groundwork for possible aggression. Quote, the enemy has begun preparing for war. It is creating conditions aimed at undermining public trust in the government, the armed forces, and the police, as well as setting the stage for potential aggression on Polish territory. There's also Polish social media trying to blame Ukraine for those attacks as well. So that's what's going on there. NATO bombers entered the Baltic airspace. Russian fleet was put on alert. American B-52 heavy bombers have begun flying for several days over this area, Schleswig, Holstein, and Mecklenburg, Western Pomerania. These strategic aircraft usually patrol the Pacific or train over the Nevada desert, but now they're flying over the Baltic coastline. The Bomber Task Force Europe mission was launched in Spain with official goals of training with allies and strengthening coordination in the region. One of the routes went almost to the Finnish-Russian border with in-flight refueling. Moscow responded by sending its warships to the German island of Farman. Okay, so it's becoming a tit for tat here, and it's Again, it's just the level of intensity just keeps ratcheting up slowly, but ever so surely. It just keeps going a little bit higher and a little bit higher. Now, even Steven Seagal is out there saying nutty things. Well, he's been saying nutty things for some time, but he's talking to a Russian audience, talking about, well, this. Let's listen.
Before the special operation, Ukraine was known for human trafficking, organ trafficking, narco trafficking, child sex trafficking, biochemical warfare labs, fascism, and Nazism. And these are the things that we still try to make them our brothers. And these are all poisons that can affect the entire world, not just us. Many people say we are facing an existential threat by all these conditions. But actually, the whole world is at risk of becoming dangerously close to entering into World War III. We are facing the same monster trying to devour, conquer, and control the world through lies, disinformation, and manipulation.
But that same monster is in Russia. He's talking about Ukraine being the monster through lies and disinformation. And then it's translated. Yeah, and it's translated. Okay, so I thought, that's really interesting. Let's look at this. Let's look at just what he said. I just fed it into some AI and said, okay, Ukraine versus Russia, give me a Likert comparison. Human trafficking, yeah, there is human trafficking. There's human trafficking in the United States, unfortunately. We want to root it out, but there is some. But on a 5-point scale, Ukraine had a 3, Russia had a 5. Child sex trafficking, again, 3 to 4. Organ trafficking, 0 actual credible information on either side. Narcotics trafficking, 3 as opposed to 4. So on every scale so far, it's been worse in Russia than in Ukraine, but this is not what you hear. Bioweapons, there's no credible information, regardless of what Tucker Carlson might say. Russia actually inherited Soviet-era labs, so there could very well be there. 0 to 4. Fascism and Nazism at the state level ideology, 0 as opposed to 2. General corruption and organized crime. There is corruption in Ukraine, sure, but it's far worse in Russia. Look at even Transparency International's index, and you'll see that very thing. Okay, so let's look at this. Tusk urges Ukrainians to avoid corruption and not to resemble the Russians. This was just a couple days ago because tolerating such actions could ultimately cost you the war, said the Polish prime minister. Right. So now a court is deciding pre-trial measures for former deputy prime minister Chernyshov, accused of illicit enrichment in the Energo-Atom corruption case. Investigators allege that he received over 1.2 million and nearly 100,000 euros in cash. Prosecutors are pushing for detention while Chernyshov denies all charges. He faces up to 10 years in prison. So they're actually working on prosecuting. These kind of things get swept under the rug in Russia. So it's a very different scenario. Okay, let's look at what's going on in the United States. President Trump is talking about sanctioning countries doing business with Russia. I know he's talked about it and talked about it and talked about it, but the last little batch of sanctions actually had a tremendous effect on Lukoil and Rosatom and et cetera. The Republicans are putting the legislation in that's very tough, he says. Let's listen to him for just 20 seconds.
The Republicans are putting in legislation that very tough. It's sanctioning, et cetera, on any country doing business with Russia. They may add Iran to that, as you know. I suggested it.
Okay, so they like this because of the sanctions, not necessarily because of Ukraine, Russia, but because they get the sanction effect or the tariff effect or whatever they're going to get out of that. Okay, meanwhile, they're distracted with Maduro. The United States has announced plans to designate the Cartel de los Soles. I guess that's of the sun. That's a couple years of high school Spanish talking. Led by Venezuela's dictator Maduro as a terror organization. The FTO, Foreign T organization status, allows for more active measures, including the use of military force. And what we know is that there's military force right off the coast. Just as a reminder, Gonzalez handily beat Maduro, but Maduro says, no, I counted the votes. My justice ministers counted the votes, and it turns out I won. So he shouldn't be in power. He's not actually the legitimate ruler, but should we be doing it this way? That's the question. Michael McFall says Maduro must go. He stole the last election. Gonzalez won. The democratic world has many more levels of power short of invasion to restore democracy in Venezuela. We should use them all. Gary Kasparov reacting to John Bolton. John Bolton says regime change in Venezuela is the right policy for the United States to have. The influence of Russian, Cuban, Iranian, Chinese, and other extra hemispheric powers in Venezuela poses a threat to our side of the globe. Okay, so the Russians are there. They have their hand in pretty much everything that's like creating trouble around the world, right? Cubans, Iranian, Chinese. Okay, Gary Kasparov reacted and said, I understand its power and I agree Maduro must go, but I'm not a fan of the spheres of influence concept. The U.S. is giving overwhelming support to Ukraine to obliterate Russian forces there would also critically weaken Maduro at all dictatorships supported by Putin. Again, there's a Russian Venezuelan connection here. Yanukovych and Assad may soon have a new exile companion. The Donald Trump administration is discussing a scenario in which Venezuela's dictator Nicolas Maduro voluntarily steps down and goes into exile in Russia. White House officials told Politico that Turkey and Cuba are also being considered as alternatives. Maduro is ready to discuss resignation if Washington grants him and his allies amnesty, removes the reward for his capture, and guarantees safe and comfortable exile. So maybe there will be something that happens without any military interaction. Trump has publicly stated that he's willing to meet with Venezuelan dictator, although he did not specify the timing or format of such a meeting. Meanwhile, the U.S. is increasing military pressure. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has announced the start of Operation Southern Spear against Narco T in the Western Hemisphere. A carrier strike group led by the USS Gerald R. Ford has already entered the Caribbean. So that's where we are with that. On a different note, in the U.S., they've been talking about the Epstein files, and there's about a vote to happen about the Epstein files and releasing them and that sort of thing. At 9:15 p.m., Donald Trump threw in the towel. The House committee can have whatever they are legally entitled to do. I don't care, he said. This is a lie. Everything Trump did in recent months shows that he cared deeply about not releasing the Epstein file. So, again, bad things happen in all countries, including here in the United States with Epstein and his lot. Okay. On a positive note, former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has joined the advisory board of Ukraine's leading defense company, Firepoint. Firepoint is a leading Ukrainian defense company known for its long-range drones capable of striking targets deep inside Russian territory. Firepoint is establishing a new factory in Denmark. The facility aims to expand operations to produce battle-tested cruise missiles. Firepoint has successfully tested the Flamingo missile on the battlefield at least 4 times. The current design of the Flamingo missile combines old Soviet-era weapons with new technologies. For example, its engines were taken from old Soviet aircraft. So that's a positive sign. You have a former U.S. Secretary of State on the board. He has connections that will be hopefully very helpful. All right, last little bit. Gaslighting isn't real. You're just overreacting. Okay, my friends, you can buy that mug online. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person who cares about Ukraine.